Hello, Isabel Carmody here again, and this is my fourth read of Grigori's Solution, which is in this collection, and we might actually finish it tonight. I'm not sure, we'll see. I had a bit of technical trouble last night. I'm trying to learn to use a gimbal. I won't even begin to tell you what a gimbal is, maybe with the next reading I do. But I had a lot of questions, so before I started, I thought I would show you why was there a picture of me with a ukulele? Well, my daughter Adelaide bought me for Christmas a ukulele, and it's finally arrived, and I was able to pick it up. This is it. She had an artist paint it. That's Miranda's name on the back, Miranda Jane. She actually paints these as one of the things she does as an artist, and this has Adelaide asked for cats and sea, because those are the things that I loved. And I really love the design around the edge. See, it's all cats and playing in the waves and the froth, and that's me. And I love these catfish. We have these beautiful catfish in my favourite colour, squids, little fish. So that's and I can already play a little bit, but I'm not going to force it on you, but that is my newest thing. And besides, I'm meant to be finishing my PhD within a couple of weeks, so this is going to have to wait. But in the meantime, here is the reading from tonight. He hesitated, and when the interviewer remained silent, she shrugged again and said that from the point of view of a theoretical someone on one of those distant stars, the ones not already long extinct, we should seem to have vanished. Then it is an illusion, since we have patently not vanished, the hostess announced triumphantly. The mathematician said he did not know how to explain it so that she would understand, without her having some understanding of math, but that she might endeavour to think it a personal extinction, each thing existing until it ceased to exist. And when one thing ceased to exist, all things would cease to exist. There had been something growing on the face of the interviewer as he spoke, and the camera panned to her face so that all who watched would have witnessed, as I did, in the sagging of her expression, her aghast realization that this was not just something that could be dissected and made jokes about after all. She was not, this time, to be a bystander far from the centre of destruction, who would afterwards groom herself and present a follow-up story. She was part of the story. She would cease to exist at the same moment as everyone else. She had utterly lost her larger-than-life glamour. When she asked, softly, almost hoarsely, "So you are saying there is nothing to be done?" The mathematician, those noisy birds. The mathematician was the sort of person for whom ideas are beautiful, and so he nodded calmly and asked, with a slight smile, if she did not think there was a sort of perfection in it, that the end of the world would come so softly and smoothly, without war or pain or horror. I do not know how many hundreds of thousands of people saw that interview, but it seemed to mark a change in how people behaved. Suddenly, almost everyone knew about the sum and what it meant. There was a shocked hiatus, a sort of false momentary peace, and then the world lurched into its brief, sharp period of madness. A few days during which people killed themselves and one another, looted and burned and fornicated indiscriminately in a mad orgy of terror and denial. I saw brief, dreadful glimpses of this in cobbled-together news flashes between repeats of recent daytime or nighttime talk shows featuring politicians making statements or movie stars offering comments, and then suddenly there was nothing but white noise until the power failed on the island. It may have taken longer on the mainland and in other parts of the world, but I have no doubt it soon failed everywhere. Who, after all, would choose to man the switches in a power station for the last days of their life? There was ugliness and violence on the island too, but not as much as elsewhere. Some people killed themselves. A predictable response, though stupidly redundant. One man said to me before he blew his head off with a hunting rifle that it was his helplessness that was intolerable to him. Suicide in such an instant seemed to him to be an act of decisive courage. He was very passionate in his explanation, almost as if he were trying to convince me, though in fact I had not tried to argue with him or change his mind. He was not alone. For a time the island seemed fairly to resound with explosions and gunshots and screams and crashes. I was not sorry to see an end to such people with their violent and destructive responses, though I did feel sadness for the children and women and the few men deprived of choice by their partners. There were very few murders, perhaps because vengeance and hate must have seemed pointless to anyone rational. There was one cringing little woman whom I had seen coming from time to the supermarket in town when I had been well enough to walk there. I noticed that she always wore dark, large glasses, not quite dark or wide enough to hide her bruises. Electra told me coolly that she had shot her big brute of a husband before leaping off a cliff. It seems a pity she killed herself, as well as her tormentor, since she might have enjoyed a few days free of terror and pain before the end. Probably that seems a rather immoral observation, but somehow most of the morals humanity has seen fit to construct seem quite beside the point now. When all the great, forceful and truculent dying petered out, a sort of calm peacefulness descended upon us, which is surprisingly beautiful. People have grown kind and quiet and pensive. If it is not in bad taste to say so, it seems to me that humanity's finest hour might be its last. Those that remain have turned to the business of living out their final days in whatever way seems best to them. Of course, there will be other suicides, but those are likely to be more artistic and symbolic responses to the end of the world than primitive violence. Of course, there are no more planes or cruise ships, no supplies of food coming in. All services ceased immediately the world understood what was happening. This would have been the cause for some alarm if we had not understood that the world would cease to exist well before supplies on the island are exhausted. Naturally, restaurants and shops have ceased to operate. People walked away from businesses and shops. In one stroke, the sum of undoing had laid bare the utter meaninglessness of fame and power and money. It has become very quiet, and there is little talk. People seem largely to have retreated into their own homes and heads. I do not see this as a rejecting of others, but as a form of acceptance. For is not the human condition truly to be alone at the end, even in normal circumstances? We are born alone and we must die alone. That has not changed. In truth, Grigori's solution has found a way to unite us in our solitude, so that while solitary, we may feel ourselves to be part of a collective humanity in a way that has never before been possible. There is no fear, it seems to me. Even quite young people like the neighbour's daughter, Electra, horrid name to give a child, I thought at first, though now it seems to fit her very well, for she has a great moral decisiveness, seems to be serene in her acceptance of the end that will come. In Electra's case, it is not very surprising, for she is an unusual girl, being both self-sufficient and naturally inclined to solitude. I had wondered a little if she might suddenly feel vulnerable and cling to her parents, but she has retained her distance with them, only occasionally showing the sudden, touching, awkward spurt of affection. It is they who would cling, if she allowed it, but she does not, and they are too respectful of her to trespass, even in this extremity. In the main, she spends her time alone with her iPod plugged into her ears. She had the forethought to power up a number of external devices that will enable her to listen to music to the end, if she wishes. She immerses herself in music, her mother told me rather wistfully soon after they arrived, when she came to introduce herself. She explained that Electra wrote and performed her own songs, and I was curious enough to ask what sort of songs. To my surprise, she furtively brought out a computer and played one of her daughter's recorded songs to me. I had been very surprised by the girl's voice. It was very husky and subtle, as were the words and music she had composed. I have no doubt she would have been very successful as a singer had the world lasted long enough to allow it. Aside from being talented, she is extremely beautiful. I like to watch her, for such beauty is strangely mesmerizing. Though I am careful, of course I have no sexual interest in the child, but being a man, and especially an old man, I must guard myself against any seeming impropriety, even now. I am not alone in watching her. I have seen others staring at her from their terrace. Even Oleg the bear watched her when he carried heavy piles of tourist bags up and down the steps from their owner's accommodation. His head never turned in her direction, and his eyes were always hidden behind his sunglasses. But I had noticed that he always stopped to rearrange his burden when she was lying on the terrace. Perhaps it is only that he was struck by the absolute contrast between them. She with her long, pale, slender limbs and cool expression, her porcelain skin and sleek swathe of bronze hair, and he with his hard, hugely muscular brown body, liberally furred with the same coarse black hair that mats his head. He is handsome enough for all his ferocious glower, though in a brutish way. He is only in his early 30s, but far too old for a 15-year-old girl. The bear was her nickname for him, which I had thought a minor cruelty, until I realized that she meant it only factually, and truly he did seem more bear than human for his surly grunts and growls. I have not seen him for some days, because like all of the white-clad staff of these many tourist villas and hotels, he has vanished, gone to see to his own end. The last time I saw him, he was being accosted by the odd little besuited Asian man staying at the rather shabby atelier a little further down the hill, whose guests were also served by Oleg and his two companions in the matter of luggage transport. The little man had appeared to be berating Oleg in some incomprehensible Asian language. Well, I think I'm going to stop there because there's enough to read. There's quite a bit more than I expected to last at the end. I think most of you have realised by now from the photos I'm using that I wrote this in the Greek islands, that I conceived of it and wrote the first draft in the Greek islands, staying there year after year in this doctor's villa that I used to rent. And something about that pure whiteness and the beauty of it and the idea of coming to an end in such a place seemed... I mean, I've written a few stories there. I might actually read another one of them, although some of them I've actually read in a borrow box. If you want to borrow books where I've read those ones, I probably have read. But those stories always strike me as being stories that are significant to me because they happen there. The girl in the story, I always think of her as Adelaide, who, of course, my daughter writes her own songs and is in many ways like the character of Electra. So you can also look her music up too. I might post about that at the very, or talk about that and show you her address in case you've never encountered her at the very end. Thank you. This is the fourth reading of Grigori's Solution, and I'll read the last bit tomorrow night. Thank you for joining me.